it's time for Chapter 2 of Avatar, Book 1 by S.D. Perry. Which I read, and several others. For Trek Book Club, find it Twitter at Trek Book Club. And let's start right in with Chapter 2, because I'm eager. Although he was only 3 minutes late, Cassidy was already waiting when Bashir got to the infirmary, sitting on the edge of one of the diagnostic tables and chatting with Dr. Tarsis. Yes, that is Tarsis from the Next Generation episode, The Drumhead, if you remember. He was part Romulan and had lied about it, and that torpedoed his career, but apparently not forever, because he's a doctor and he's on Deep Space Nine. And I'll want to do some planting in the spring, Cassidy was saying, her back to Bashir as he approached. Kava, I think, if I'm not too fat to bend over by then. Bashir noted the readout over the bed with a practiced eye as he joined them, pleased with the slight weight gain since her last checkup. Perfectly within normal human parameters. In 5 months you'll be as big as a runabout, I imagine, he said. Bending over shouldn't be a problem, although standing back up might take some work. His listeners laughed, and Julian felt his spirits lift. Getting up early to conduct autopsies was not his idea of a pleasant morning, and for Kira's friend to have been murdered. Poor Nerys. Yes, poor Nerys. Bad enough to lose someone important, but practically, the timing couldn't be worse. Kira wasn't always good at delegating responsibility. Too often overburdening herself, and the current upgrades to the station were no exception. With the Federation and Bajor both reorganizing their resources and personnel, along with practically everyone else in the Alpha Quadrant, DS9 had been operating understaffed anyway. Technical support personnel were in short supply, and even with Jazz to take over arrangements with Starfleet, Kira wasn't smiling as much as she used to. That was a long sentence. The look on her face when she touched her friend. Ezri should speak to her professionally, assuming she could find the time in the next year or two. The slightly sour thought surprised him, though only until he remembered the reason. Ezri had already been gone when he got in the call that woke him, off to help Nog with some engineering conundrum. Again. Funny how quickly he'd gotten used to having her beside him when he woke, and how much he missed her when she wasn't there. Tarsis handed over the shift report and said his goodbyes, leaving them in relative privacy. Both nurses on duty, Bajorans, stayed a respectful distance away, although he would have to speak to them about the beaming glances that couldn't seem to help shooting in Cassidy's direction. He knew that the emissary's wife didn't care much for the attention, resigned to it or not. Julian pulled up a chair and sat, calling up Cassidy's charts on a widescreen pad. It had been 2 weeks since he'd seen her last, for a topical rash she'd picked up on her last run to the Orion system. It had turned out to be an extremely mild allergic reaction to a shipment of Rocalian Pelosi that had gone bad, thanks to a malfunctioning refrigeration unit. So, tell me how you're feeling these days. He glanced at her hands. No more bumps, I see. I assume you're staying away from Rocalian fruit. Cassidy nodded, smiling. Absolutely. In fact, I'm staying away from the cargo holds altogether. Other than that, let's see. I feel pretty good, I guess. Still no more morning sickness. I'm a little tired, even though it seems like I'm sleeping at least 10 hours a night. Oh, and I've recently developed a craving for anything made with ginger root, of all things. Julian ran the bed's diagnostic against a handheld tricorders as she spoke, careful to keep the screen away from her line of sight. Cassidy insisted on keeping to a family tradition regarding ignorance of gender prior to birth. The child sex was listed in the upper left corner, along with a series of numbers that suggested textbook normal development for the 4th month. Both she and the child were doing remarkably well. I guess I shouldn't be surprised, Cassidy continued. Ben loved Ginger, he said. Her smile faded slightly, her hands moving to her belly. He said there was no such thing as a good stir-fry without Ginger. Julian nodded, setting aside his tricorder and focusing his full attention on Cassidy. I remember. He made it for me once with Bajoran shrimp. It was wonderful. I love shrimp. I would totally eat that. Cassidy smiled crookedly, still holding her lower belly. I've been thinking I should take up cooking. I never wanted to before, but I set up the kitchen just like he wanted. It seems a shame to let it go to waste. Cisco's dream house in the Kendra province on Bajor. He'd bought the land just before the end of the war. And Cassidy had decided to build the home he designed and live there until his return. Through Kira, Julian knew that she'd agonized over the kitchen, about everything from whether or not to put in a dividing wall to what kind of appliances Cisco would want. It's finished already? Julian asked. Last I heard, there was some problem finding the right kind of cooking device. Quark came through, Cassidy said. Don't ask me where he found it either. Original wood stoves are hard to come by these days. As for the rest of the house, you'd be surprised how quickly things go when everyone on the planet wants you to get settled in. That's all right with you, isn't it? Julian asked gently. Most of the time. They care about him too, in their own way. She seemed a bit melancholy, but not actually depressed. Under the circumstances, it was the best he could hope for. Having one's love whisked away to fulfill his own spiritual destiny couldn't be easy, particularly with a baby on the way. Love could be such a tenuous thing, running from emotional ecstasy to fear of loss and back again in a matter of days, hours, really. There were times he felt so connected to Esri, so elated with what they had, that it was hard to accept the distance that could grow up between them sometimes, and sudden and strange as. A robbery on board, Julian? It's a little clever. He started. I'm sorry, I'm a bit distracted this morning. You were saying? I said that the station seems different now, even dangerous sometimes. Did you hear about the robbery? Yes, 2 people were killed, I'm sorry to say. Cassidy shook her head. There are just so many strangers here lately. I really think this move will be good for me, for us. Julian smiled. I think that anything that makes you happy will be good for you, and the baby. She patted the swell beneath her fingers. Me too. Another 2 weeks and we'll be setting up house. We'll be visiting a lot. I'm still part-time with the Commerce Ministry, at least until the big day, but Bajor will be home. A positive note to end on. He stood up and was about to tell her to check in before she left, when she asked him a question. He wasn't sure how to answer. So distracted, huh? How are things going with Esri? I'm fine. Well, I think. He felt suddenly flustered and sat down again. Cassidy's kind expression was inviting, and he hadn't really had a chance to talk about his relationship since Miles had left. Has it really been that long? He shared so much with Esri, it hadn't occurred to him to talk about her with anyone. And things were going well, weren't they? Julian took a deep breath and started talking, and quickly discovered that he had more to say than he thought. Not a big fan of the Julian-Esri relationship. It felt, in that final season, it felt rather perfunctory to me. And, truth be told, those first few episodes, when the Ciscos went with Esri to look for the last orb in the desert, I was getting into Esri and Jake. I saw something there. But anyway, not a big fan of Esri and Julian. much like Julian trying to make some kind of equivalence between that relationship and the relationship between Cassidy and Ben, but he's a little bit self-absorbed, and it's probably natural. His relationship's on his mind. So I'll pick that up next time.